They was all tied up, chained up. Two was on the bed, one was by the pool table, and one was standing up by the window.
Heidnk's sick perversions are what partly inspired the character Buffalo Bill in the Academy Award-winning movie The Silence of the Lambs. Heidnk had a pit he'd filled with water and electric shocked the women. But the torture didn't end there. There were daily rapes and beatings.
He wrapped tape around our mouth and drove a screwdriver right in our ears and turned them.
He wanted to have a perfect race, according to him, of children from these women.
Chuck Peruto was an up-and-coming defense attorney in the late 80s and represented Heidnk after he was captured after Josephina.
Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Gary Michael Heidnk was known as an ephebophilic killer, serial rapist, abductor, and projected cannibal who abducted, tortured, and raped 6 African-American women, keeping them captive in his basement in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. On November 25, 1986, Josefina Rivera was hustling on the corner of 3rd and Girard at about 11 p.m. A 1987 Caddy, a Coupe de Ville, pulled up. She states the driver of the car and I discussed price. We came to an agreement of $20. He drove me to 3520 North Marshall Street and we went into the house. He identified himself to me as Gary Heidnk. We went up to the 2nd floor front bedroom and he gave me a $20 bill. Then we took off our clothes and we had sex on his waterbed. We got off the bed and I was walking over to where my clothing was and he came up behind me and grabbed me by my neck. I wasn't able to breathe and then I went unconscious. When I regained consciousness, he had me on the bed. He had a handcuff on my right wrist. He kept telling me to shut up or he was going to choke me. I told him, all right, I'll do anything you say, but don't hurt me. When we got into the basement, I saw this big hole in the floor and plastic bags full of dirt were stacked in the corner. He shackled my legs to a chain. He used clamps that are used to hold mufflers on around my ankles, and he secured them with nuts. Then he put crazy glue on the nuts so that I couldn't turn them. He told me that he was going to get me pregnant, and I would have his children and he would raise them. He put me in a hole in the basement floor. He kept trying to put a board over top of me, but it wouldn't fit because the hole wasn't deep enough. He finally forced the board down over me, and after I was in there a while, I had trouble breathing and I was screaming. He took the board off and pulled me out of the hole by my hair, and then he picked up a stick and started to beat me with it. Then he put me back in the hole and left me there for a long time. It seemed like it was a full day or more. Then I heard his voice and a girl's voice coming down into the basement. I could hear him saying, "Be quiet. Shut up, Sandy. You know that I am not going to hurt you." Gary Michael Heidnk was honestly the epitome of evil. FBI famed profiler John Douglas even claimed that Gary spooked him. Heidnk was born near Cleveland, Ohio in 1943 and was the last man killed in Pennsylvania by lethal injection on July 6, 1999. In between those dates, what he did actually inspired movies such as Silence of the Lambs. The character Buffalo Bill was made up of 6 serial killers, and Gary was one of these killers. He put women into a pit, chained them to walls, and shocked them with water in these really bizarre electrical ways to punish them. He would, just sit back and sneer and even chuckle as they danced in death. But one woman would actually turn the tables on him, a woman named Josefina Rivera. She would trick him, and what she did was, well, horrifically beautiful. She is truly a hero. What happened at 3520 North Marshall Street is just about unbelievable, except that it really happened. The self-proclaimed minister with a long history of mental illness preyed upon the susceptible and the retarded in a bizarre plan to create his own baby factory. He was an ephebophile, a person who is primarily attracted to mid to late or post-adolescence, or boys and girls who have gone through puberty and have advanced signs of adult sexual maturation. Generally, this means teenagers between 15 and 19 years old, though it may depend on the teenager's puberty status. Gary Heidnk was born in Eastlake, Ohio on November 22nd, 1943. Gary would eventually learn how to control people after having a rough start to his life. He'd suffered through a brutal childhood during which he claimed his father abused him and mercilessly mocked, the young boy's bedwetting. Heidnk's parents divorced due to his mother's alcoholism. As a result, Heidnk and his brother Terry went to live with their father, who later remarried. Heidnk and Terry both hated their stepmother, but their father always sided with her when it came to conflicts. Heidnk's father would punish him severely for wetting the bed by hanging the soiled sheets by his bedroom window for everyone to see. Sometimes he even dangled him out the window, shaking him by the ankles. While he was still a child, Heidnk fell from a tree, smashing his skull and suffering a misshapen cranium, which is believed to have caused behavioral aberration. His schoolmates called him Football Head because of it. In 1961, when he was 18, Heidnk, through his father's encouragement, dropped out of high school and enlisted in the U.S. Army, once being stationed in West Germany during his time there in the summer of 1962. He was honorably discharged a year after his enlistment, receiving a full disability pension and being diagnosed with schizoid personality disorder. In 1964, Heidnk started taking nursing classes in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, completing them a year later and receiving an internship at Philadelphia General Hospital. In 1967, he purchased a 3-story house and started frequenting the Elwyn Institute, a house for the developmentally disabled. So, after his mother committed suicide by overdosing on medication and alcohol back in 1970, Heidnk made his first of many suicide attempts, which, led to frequent hospitalizations. Then, after incorporating the United Church of the Ministers of God, Heidnk actually founded the Church of Heidnk as its ordained minister, calling himself Brother Heidnk. With a $1,500 investment in a Merrill Lynch account, the church ended up making at least $500,000. In 1976, he sold his house and bought another 3-story house, renting out 2 of the floors. He moved in with his mentally disabled girlfriend, Anjanette Davidson, and, started living what looked like a successful life. But he later assaulted one of the house's tenants. In 1978, Heidnk had his first child, a daughter named Maxine, with his girlfriend. He then went on to abduct her sister, Alberta, who was also mentally disabled, from an institution in Harrisburg. He was arrested and charged with aggravated assault, and then faced multiple charges of abduction and rape because the woman was found chained in his basement. While the aggravated assault charges were dropped, Heidnk served 3 to 7 years in prison for the other charges, but was released in April 1983. In 1984, he bought his 3rd house. He started advertising his church, and the following year he married a mail-order bride, Betty Disto, from the Philippines, but the marriage didn't last long after Disto discovered that Heidnk was having affairs with 3 other women, and to make things worse, he forced his wife to watch while he had sex with other women. Unbeknownst to Heidnk, until his ex-wife demanded child support, Disto had given birth to his son, Jesse John Disto, after their divorce. Actually, the 2 other women also complained about his deviant sexual practices and his disturbing tendency to lock them up. But those tendencies were about to reach new depths, as he would soon kidnap 6 black women to rape and torture. Driven by his twisted desire to have sex slaves and create a so-called harem, Heidnk began his series of abductions and rapes in 1986. On November 25th, he picked up Josefina Rivera, a part-time African-American sex worker, and took her to his house. Gary Heidnk captured his first victim, Josefina Rivera, and it's hard to imagine, but he actually turned her, by many accounts, into an accomplice of sorts. The way he initially captured her, though, was as brutal as the capture of any of his other victims. Like all of the women that the real-life Buffalo Bill Killer targeted, Rivera was a sex worker lured into his home by the promise of money. While Rivera was getting her clothes back on after they had sex, Heidnk came up from behind and choked her. Then he dragged her down to his basement, shackled her limbs together with chains, and sealed the bolts in with superglue. Her life flashed before her eyes. All I could remember was like a film projector of things that were going on in my life, Rivera would later say of the experience. It was like, just flipping back. Gary Heidnk then beat her with a stick until she stopped screaming for help. Then he threw her into a pit, boarded it up, and sealed her in. The only light that seeped in came through thin cracks in a wood covering overhead. He would kidnap 5 more women in just 3 months, all in the same way that Rivera was abducted. All of the victims were black because, as Heidnk's lawyer would later reveal, he was trying to enslave 10 black girls to have a baby with all of them, and he was going to create a perfect race. Much like Rivera, the other victims were choked, chained up, thrown into the pit, and boarded up inside, only pulled out to be raped or tortured. On December 3rd, 1986, Heidnk abducted the mentally disabled Sandra Lindsay, whom he had gotten pregnant previously, but she had an abortion, which angered him. Heidnk fed the 2 women irregularly, kept them half naked, and raped them repeatedly. On December 23rd, he brought 19-year-old Lisa Thomas over to his home. He drugged her wine and put her in the basement with the other women. A week later, on January 2nd, 1987, Heidnk abducted Deborah Dudley. During her period of captivity, she would try to defend herself against Heidnk, but was beaten and put in the pit more than the others. After Dudley's abduction, Heidnk further humiliated the 4 women by forcing them to have sex with each other and made them eat dog food. On January 18th, he abducted Jacqueline Askins. On February 7th, Heidnk became angry with Lindsay for some unspecified reasons and punished her by hanging her by one of her wrists from a roof beam for 2 days. She developed a high fever and sadly died the next morning. He then took her body upstairs, dismembered it with a power saw, put her head into a cooking pot, and cut out her flesh. He fed some of her parts to his 2 dogs and the rest to his captives. A couple of days later, neighbors complained of a terrible smell, prompting police to investigate. Heidnk was interrogated and, he successfully explained that he had burnt his food. Rivera eventually convinced Heidnk that she was on his side, and he made her the boss of the other women. If Rivera did what he said, he'd bring her hot chocolate and hot dogs and let her sleep outside of the hole. But he made one thing clear: if she disobeyed him, she could lose all of her privileges. After that, Heidnk bribed his captives into telling on one another. Josefina Rivera told him that the others had planned to attack him and escape. As a result, he made them deaf by driving screwdrivers through their eardrums. Heidnk started to apply electrocution to all of his captives, except Rivera, who started to aid him in torturing the others. She also had other privileges after apparently becoming his favorite, including being occasionally allowed upstairs to watch a movie or being allowed to be raped in a more comfortable environment. Eventually, on March 19, 1987, Heidnk took Deborah Dudley to the cellar, threw her in a water-filled pit, and fatally electrocuted her due to her resistance. Heidnk barely reacted. "Yeah, she's dead," he said after checking her body. "Now I can get back to having a peaceful basement." He and Rivera later disposed of her body, later abducting Agnes Adams to replace Dudley. After Dudley's brutal murder, another horrific death occurred in the basement, the murder of Sandra Lindsay, a mentally disabled woman whom Gary Heidnk had lured in shortly after he abducted Rivera. Lindsay couldn't handle the abuse as long as the others did, so Gary Heidnk put her, quote, on punishment and starved her for days. When he tried to give her food again, she didn't move. He released her chains and she collapsed. The women were only allowed a few moments to panic when they started screaming at the sight of their friend who they now realized was dead. Heidnk told them to, quote, cut out their bullshit or they would die next. He then dragged Lindsay's body upstairs and cut it into pieces. And he cooked her ribs in the oven, boiled her head on the stove. My neighbor's complaints of the smell prompted a police visit. But he claimed he just absent-mindedly burned a roast, a moule, and put her arms and legs in a freezer. Then he ground her flesh up, mixed it with dog food, and brought it down to the other women. 3 of the women were still, quote, on punishment. A few days before, he'd let them watch TV, and one had angered him by saying she was so hungry that the dog food in an ad looked, quote, good enough to eat. She'd get dog food, Heidnk told her, and she and the other 2 women would eat it, with Lindsay's body parts mixed in it, though some sources refute this account and say that Heidnk made it up to support an insanity defense later. It would plague them for the rest of their lives, but they didn't have much of a choice. They had to either cannibalize their dead friend or they would die. As one of the women, Jacqueline Askins, would later say, if it wasn't for me eating her or eating dog food, I couldn't be here today. Any time that you're cut off from the world outside, Josefina Rivera admitted after she escaped her captor's clutches, whoever's holding you captive, you're going to grow to like him regardless, because he's your only contact to things that are outside. He's your only source of survival. Toward the end, Heidnk was using her as bait to catch more women. He'd let her enter the outside world to help him pick up other potential victims and lure them into his home, always keeping her close by his side. She used the goodwill she'd earned to get these temporary trips out of the basement. On March 24th, 1987, Rivera asked Heidnk's permission to be allowed to visit her family after helping Heidnk abduct the 7th victim, possibly assuming that she had fallen to Stockholm Syndrome, therefore believing she would not run to the authorities. He allowed it. He would wait at the gas station. They agreed, and she'd come right back. However, Rivera went home to tell her boyfriend, Vincent Nelson, what had happened and called 911, and Heidnk was arrested. After 4 months of imprisonment, the women were finally free and furious with Rivera. Even though she had freed them, they were still angry about the role she played in their torture, especially Dudley's death. Some even wanted Rivera to be charged as an accomplice. But in the end, Rivera was recognized as a victim, as Heidnk was forced to face the court. On June 1988, he first appeared in court. For his defense, Heidnk made the unlikely claim that the woman he abducted had been in his basement when he moved into the house. When he tried to claim that he was legally insane, it was rebutted by the fact that he had earned $500,000 at the stock market. On July 1st, Heidnk was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 5 of kidnapping, 6 of rape, 4 of aggravated assault, and 1 of involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, being sentenced to death. On December 31st, while awaiting execution, he attempted to commit suicide by overdosing on Thorazine, but he only fell into a brief coma. On April 15, 1997, Heidnk was scheduled to be executed by lethal injection at Rockview State Prison in Belafonte, but a last-minute appeal was filed, leading to a hearing to determine his mental competency. On June 25, 1999, the state Supreme Court affirmed the death sentence. Finally, on July 6, 1999, Heidnk received a lethal injection and became the last person to be executed in the state of Pennsylvania. A decade earlier, while he was still in prison, Heidnk's infamous legacy in pop culture was secured when he inspired the character of Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. The character's house of horrors and his penchant for keeping women confined in a basement pit really recalled Heidnk's crimes. As for Heidnk's church, it's honestly hard to say who knew what. Even after he was arrested, they kept coming to church. While every news channel was blaring stories about Heidnk's den of victims and the way he abused them, his followers kept coming out to his house for Sunday services. At least one follower, a man named Tony Brown, helped Heidnk torture the women. He thought of himself as Gary Heidnk's best friend. He was there when Heidnk starved Lindsay to death and when Heidnk dismembered her body and wrapped her limbs up and labeled them dog meat. Brown, however, was mentally disabled. He was a victim of Heidnk's manipulation, according to his lawyer, a man who fit the pattern of Heidnk's victims. He's poor, retarded, and black. According to Heidnk's neighbors, the members of his church fit this description as well. He held these church services on Sunday. A lot of people came, one of his neighbors recalled. They were usually mentally retarded. This sick bastard's modus operandi. Heidnk targeted African American women in their late teens to mid-20s. He usually abducted them by simply bringing them over to his house, where he proceeded to either drug them or attack them. He also tortured his captives in many ways, including rape, beating, electric shock, forcing them to have sex with each other while he watched, and hanging by the wrists, as in the case of Lindsay's death. Whenever one of them disobeyed him, he would force her into a 4-foot deep pit filled with water and place a wooden board weighed down with stones so she could not escape. He would then place an electrical cable that wasn't insulated on one end and connected to an outlet on the other through a gap in the board to electrocute her, in an attempt to deafen his victims so they would not be able to hear him come down the basement. He cuffed each victim's hands and feet together, hung them from a basement beam, gagged them, and gouged different-sized screwdrivers into their ears. He did not do this to Rivera due to her compliance and telling him about his victims' escape attempts. During their captivity, he fed them food, the amount and type varying based on his mood, dog food, and even forced them to eat Lindsay's body. Truly horrific, one of the most disturbing stories I have encountered. What do you think? Comment below. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Blessings, Luke chapter 17, verses 3-4. If your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him.